Clarice had nothing left except a worn backpack and her daughter Noah's hand, which squeezed her fingers with fear. Expelled from every shelter and tired of being invisible, they climbed the hill to the Silver Crown Observatory, a metal ruin locked for 30 years that everyone in town called the Dead Carcass. But while the world saw only garbage and darkness, Clarice saw a chance. They moved into the freezing dome in secret, surviving where no one else would dare step. What nobody knew was that for months, Clarice worked day and night using the giant mirrors and lenses of the old telescope for something that defied logic. She wasn't just cleaning the place, she was building a masterpiece of peace that no one could imagine. Stay with me until the end, because you won't believe what happened when authorities finally broke down the doors to evict that homeless woman. The moment light hit what Clarice built inside, silence took over. Police and inspectors stood paralyzed, speechless, before a secret so magnificent it would change that city's destiny forever. What she did inside wasn't just shelter, it was a miracle no one ever forgot. The rain came without warning, turning the park bench into useless wood. Clarice pulled her jacket tighter around Noah, but it was thin, worn through at the elbows, offering little protection against the storm hammering down. "Mom, I'm cold," Noah whispered, her 14-year-old voice trembling not just from temperature but from exhaustion of living this way for 3 months. "I know, baby. Just hold on a little longer." Clarice's words felt hollow. Hold on to what? There was nothing left. This bench had been their spot for 2 weeks. During the day, they pretended to be tourists resting between sightseeing. At night, they huddled under a thin blanket, trying to sleep while the world passed by without seeing them. But now even this small claim to space was being taken away. A police officer approached, flashlight cutting through rain. Clarice had learned to recognize that walk, official, purposeful, bringing bad news disguised as duty. "Ladies, you can't stay here. Park closes at sunset. You need to move along." Clarice wanted to ask where exactly they should move to, but she'd learned that question only made things worse. Instead, she gathered their few possessions, the backpack with 2 changes of clothes, a water bottle, a photograph of better days, and took Noah's hand. They walked into the rain, with nowhere to go. Clarice hadn't always been this person. 2 years ago, she'd been an art teacher at a community center, modest but stable. She had an apartment, a car that mostly worked, and hope for the future. Then her ex-husband stopped paying child support. Then the community center lost its funding. Then the landlord raised the rent beyond what unemployment could cover. She'd tried everything, applied for hundreds of jobs, reached out to every social service, begged family members who'd long since written her off as making bad choices. Each door closed a little harder than the last. Each rejection pushed them closer to the edge until there was no edge left, just the fall. Now they were here, in the rain, with a police officer watching to make sure they actually left the park. "Where are we going?" Noah asked as they walked down the empty street, water streaming down their faces. Clarice didn't answer because she didn't know. The shelters were full. She'd called them all. The few friends she had left couldn't help. They had their own struggles. Her sister had made it clear they weren't welcome after the last time they'd asked. They walked for hours, trying doorways and overhangs, but each spot was either occupied or too exposed. The storm intensified, wind whipping the rain sideways, soaking them completely. By midnight, they found themselves at the base of Crown Hill, the steep elevation on the city's north side that most people avoided. At its peak sat the Silver Crown Observatory, a relic from the 1960s space race, abandoned when funding dried up and the city decided looking at stars was less important than other budget priorities. Clarice had passed it countless times during her teaching days, never giving it much thought. Now in the storm, she looked up at the dome silhouetted against the angry sky and felt something shift inside her. "Mom, can we rest for a minute?" Noah's voice was barely audible over the storm. They huddled under a bus shelter at the hill's base, water dripping through the broken panels. Noah was shivering violently, her lips tinged blue. Clarice wrapped her arms around her daughter, trying to transfer warmth she didn't have. "Listen to me, Noah," Clarice said, lifting her daughter's chin. "I need you to be strong for just a little longer. Can you do that?" Noah nodded, though her eyes showed the toll these months had taken. She'd lost weight. Her clothes hung loose. The bright, creative girl who used to draw and laugh seemed buried under layers of exhaustion and fear. Clarice made a decision. They couldn't keep doing this, wandering, hoping, waiting for a system that had forgotten them. They needed shelter, real shelter, and that observatory, abandoned and forgotten like them, was their only option. "We're going up there," Clarice said, pointing to the dome. Noah followed her mother's finger and stared. "The old observatory? Mom, that's been closed forever. It's probably dangerous." "More dangerous than this?" Clarice gestured at the storm, at their soaked clothes, at the reality of another night with nowhere to go. "We'll just look. If it's too bad, we'll figure something else out." It was a lie. There was nothing else to figure out. This was their last option, and they both knew it. The climb began just after 1 a.m., their feet slipping on the muddy path that wound up Crown Hill. The trail hadn't been maintained in years, overgrown with weeds and littered with debris. Each step required effort, their bodies already depleted from weeks of poor nutrition and little sleep. Halfway up, Noah stumbled. Clarice caught her, held her. "I can't," Noah sobbed. "Mom, I just can't anymore." "Yes, you can," Clarice said fiercely. "You're the strongest person I know. We're almost there, just a little more." She didn't know if that was true, but she needed Noah to believe it, needed herself to believe it. They continued climbing, the storm pushing against them as if the universe itself wanted to keep them from reaching the top. But Clarice had learned one thing from these brutal months. Sometimes you have to push back against the universe with everything you have left, even if what's left is almost nothing. At 2:30 in the morning, soaked to the bone and exhausted beyond measure, they finally reached the observatory's entrance. The structure loomed above them in the darkness, rust-covered and forbidding. The Silver Crown Observatory looked worse up close than it had from below. Rust covered the metal dome like a disease. Chains and padlocks secured the main doors. Windows were broken or boarded. Graffiti declared the place belonged to various forgotten teenagers from decades past. But it was shelter. It was possibility. It was something other than the rain hammering down on them. Clarice circled the building, looking for entry. The main doors were impossible, heavy steel with industrial locks. The windows were too high or too broken to be safe, but around back, partially hidden by overgrown bushes, she found a service entrance with a damaged lock, the door slightly ajar. "Here," she called to Noah, who was leaning against the building, barely able to stand. Clarice pushed the door. It resisted, then gave with a groan of metal on metal. Beyond lay darkness and the smell of abandonment, dust, decay, stale air that hadn't circulated in decades. "Mom, I don't know about this," Noah said, fear replacing exhaustion in her voice. "It's okay. We're just getting out of the rain. Tomorrow we'll figure out something better." Another lie, but one they both needed. They stepped inside. The service corridor was narrow, walls covered in peeling paint and mold. Water had leaked through the roof at some point, creating dark stains. But it was dry now and out of the wind, and that was enough. Using her phone's dying battery as a flashlight, Clarice led them deeper into the building. They passed through what looked like old offices, desks still in place, papers yellowed and scattered, filing cabinets with drawers hanging open like mouths frozen mid-scream. Then they found stairs leading up. They climbed, emerged into the observatory's main chamber, and both stopped breathing. Even in darkness, even with just the weak glow of her phone, Clarice could see the magnitude of this space. The dome stretched above them, massive and curved like the inside of a cathedral. In the center sat the telescope, or what remained of it, a giant structure of metal and glass, 20 feet tall, pointing toward the sealed dome above, as if still waiting patiently for someone to open the sky. "Wow," Noah whispered, momentarily forgetting her cold and exhaustion. Clarice felt it too, that sense of standing in a place that had once meant something important, that had been built with purpose and hope, now forgotten and left to rot, just like us, she thought. They found a corner away from broken windows and collapsed into it. Clarice spread out their one blanket and pulled Noah close. The floor was hard and cold, but it was flat and dry, and that made it better than anywhere they'd been in weeks. "Get some sleep," Clarice murmured. "Tomorrow we'll see what we're dealing with." Noah was asleep within minutes, her body finally able to relax in relative safety. But Clarice stayed awake, listening to the storm rage outside, thinking about the path that had led them here. She'd made mistakes, yes, trusted the wrong person in her marriage, failed to save enough money, chosen a career that didn't pay well. But were those mistakes so terrible they deserved this punishment? Did Noah deserve this? As she lay there holding her sleeping daughter, Clarice's eyes adjusted to the darkness. She could make out more details now, the telescope's elaborate mechanisms, mirrors and lenses catching faint light from somewhere, the dome's inner surface covered in panels and hatches. This place had been built to look at stars, to study light traveling millions of years to reach Earth. What a strange sanctuary for two people who'd fallen so far they couldn't see stars anymore, only the mud beneath their feet. But as dawn began breaking, light filtering through cracks in the dome, something shifted in Clarice's perspective. The way the light moved, reflecting off the telescope's mirrors, bending through the old lenses, creating patterns on the walls. It was beautiful. Accidentally, unintentionally beautiful. And in that moment, exhausted and broken and huddled on a cold floor, Clarice felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt a spark of her old self, the artist, the creator, the woman who had once taught children to see beauty in unexpected places. She looked at the telescope, at the mirrors, at the light dancing across forgotten glass, and thought, what if? Morning brought clarity and complications. In daylight, the observatory revealed itself fully. Decades of neglect had taken a toll, but the structure's bones were solid. The dome was intact despite rust. The telescope, though non-functional, stood firm. The space was vast, drafty and filthy, but it was space. Noah woke slowly, confused about where they were until memory returned. She sat up, looking around at their new surroundings with a mixture of wonder and worry. "We can't stay here, can we?" she asked. Clarice wanted to say no, to tell her daughter they'd find something proper, something legal, but she was tired of lies. "I don't know where else we'd go," she admitted, "but we'll make it work, just for a little while." They spent that first day exploring. The observatory was larger than it appeared from outside. Besides the main chamber with the telescope, there were smaller rooms, control rooms filled with dead equipment, storage areas with forgotten supplies, a small kitchen that hadn't worked in decades, bathrooms with rusted fixtures, but intact plumbing. "Mom, look!" Noah called from one of the storage rooms. She'd found boxes of old equipment, parts from the telescope, tools, cleaning supplies that had somehow survived. But what caught Clarice's attention were other boxes, filled with prisms, lenses, mirrors of various sizes, equipment that had once been used to test and calibrate the telescope's optics. She pulled out a prism, held it up to a shaft of sunlight coming through a broken window, and watched rainbow light scatter across the wall. Something stirred in her chest. A memory of who she'd been before survival became her only skill. "We need to secure this place," Clarice said. "Make sure no one knows we're here." They spent 3 days making the observatory livable. They found a way to wedge the service entrance shut from inside, so it looked locked from outside, but could be opened from within. They covered the broken windows in the main chamber with cardboard and tape found in the storage rooms. They cleared space in one of the smaller rooms to be their sleeping area, away from the cold main chamber. Water was their first crisis. The building's plumbing was dead, but Clarice discovered a rainwater collection system on the roof, originally designed to keep the dome clean. With work, she got it functioning again, gravity feeding water into containers. It wasn't potable, but they could wash. For drinking water, they had to make trips down the hill with empty bottles, filling them at public fountains and carrying them back up. Food was harder. They had almost no money. Clarice started visiting food banks, but without an address, she couldn't access most services. They survived on whatever free meals they could find and the kindness of occasional strangers. Through it all, Noah never complained. She helped carry water up the hill, helped clean rooms, helped sort through decades of debris. But Clarice saw how thin she was getting, how the light in her eyes was dimming. One night, 2 weeks after they'd moved in, Clarice found Noah crying in their sleeping room. "What's wrong, baby?" "I miss school," Noah said. "I miss my friends. I miss having a normal life." Clarice held her daughter, feeling the weight of their situation crushing down. She'd stolen Noah's childhood, all because she couldn't make rent, couldn't find work, couldn't navigate a system designed to help people like them but somehow never did. "I'm going to make this better," Clarice promised. "I don't know how yet, but I will. This isn't forever." "How do you know?" Noah asked, her voice small and broken. Clarice didn't have an answer, but later that night, unable to sleep, she went into the main chamber and stood before the telescope. The moon was out, its light filtering through cracks in the dome. It hit the telescope's mirrors, reflected, refracted, created shifting patterns of light across the walls and floor. Not the sharp, focused image the telescope had been designed to create, but something else, something accidental and beautiful. Clarice watched the light move, watched shadows and brightness play across surfaces, and felt that spark again, stronger this time. She thought about her art classes, about teaching kids to see the world differently. She thought about all the abandoned things in this building, mirrors, lenses, prisms, all designed to manipulate and understand light. She thought about how light could transform space, could change how people felt in a room. What if she didn't just survive here? What if she created something? It was an insane thought. She was homeless, broke, trespassing. She had no right to this space, no resources, no reason to believe she could accomplish anything beyond basic survival. But looking at that accidental beauty, at light dancing in an abandoned temple of science, Clarice made a decision. She would transform this place, not back into what it had been, a cold monument to cosmic distance, but into something new, something that brought distant light down to earth, that used it to create a space of peace for people who, like her and Noah, needed sanctuary. She had no idea how, but she knew she had to try. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after they'd moved into the observatory. Clarice was cleaning one of the telescope's primary mirrors, a massive piece of curved glass covered in 3 decades of dust and grime. She'd been working on it for hours, using water and old rags to carefully remove the accumulated filth. As the mirror's surface cleared, revealing its perfect curve, morning sunlight hit it at just the right angle. The light reflected, bounced to a secondary mirror, then scattered across the dome's interior in a way that made Clarice stop breathing completely. The dome's inner surface was paneled with metal tiles, each slightly angled differently due to age and shifting. As the reflected light hit these panels, it fractured into hundreds of smaller beams, creating a cascade of illumination that filled the entire chamber with soft, diffused radiance. "Mom, what is that?" Noah had entered the main chamber and stood frozen, staring at the light show that danced across every surface. "It's an accident," Clarice murmured, her voice filled with wonder. "But a beautiful one. The most beautiful accident I've ever seen." She understood now. The telescope had been designed to gather distant starlight and focus it into sharp images for scientific study. But damaged, misaligned, its mechanisms broken, it was doing something entirely different. It was taking strong light from the sun and moon and transforming it into something gentler, more diffused, spreading it throughout the space instead of concentrating it into a single point. What if she could control this? What if she could intentionally create these effects? Clarice spent the next week studying how light moved through the observatory. She tracked the sun's path, noted how different times of day created different effects. She experimented with the remaining optics, moving small mirrors, repositioning lenses, creating paths for light to follow. She discovered that the building itself, in its decay, had become a massive light sculpture. Water damage had left the dome's inner surface uneven, creating natural diffusion. Rust patterns on metal created texture that broke light into interesting patterns. Even the dust in the air, which she'd initially seen as just dirt, scattered light in ways that softened harsh rays. "I need more materials," Clarice told Noah one evening as they ate their meager dinner of donated bread and canned soup. What kind of materials? Anything that reflects or refracts light. Mirrors, glass, crystals, clear plastic, old CDs work, even aluminum foil. Where are we going to get that stuff? Clarice smiled for the first time in weeks. Remember how I taught you that one person's trash is another's treasure? They began scavenging. Not stealing, Clarice was careful about that line, but finding discarded materials. Broken mirrors from dumpsters behind glass shops. Shattered crystal from estate sales that sold the valuable pieces but threw away the damaged. Old light fixtures from renovation sites. People threw away so much. Noah proved invaluable. Her young eyes spotted treasures Clarice missed. Together they brought their findings up the hill piece by piece, building a collection of light-manipulating materials. The work was slow and exhausting. They still had to find food, still had to maintain their secrecy, still had to haul water up the hill daily. But now they had purpose beyond mere survival. Clarice started with small installations. She suspended a broken chandelier from the telescope's frame, positioning it where reflected sunlight would hit it. The crystal pieces, though chipped and incomplete, caught the light and scattered it across the walls in dancing patterns. She created light paths using arranged mirrors, guiding sunlight from cracks in the dome to specific points in the chamber, building up layers of indirect illumination that made the space glow without harsh shadows. She used prisms from the telescope's old calibration equipment to break white light into rainbows, then positioned those rainbows to overlap, creating color fields that shifted as the sun moved across the sky. "It's like painting with light," Noah observed one afternoon, watching her mother adjust a series of small mirrors. "That's exactly what it is," Clarice agreed, "except the paint is always moving, always changing. Each hour of each day creates a different work." But Clarice's vision extended beyond just the visual. She remembered from her teaching days that spaces affected people in multiple ways. Through light, yes, but also through sound, through texture, through the way air moved. She noticed that the dome's acoustics were extraordinary. Sounds echoed and layered in ways that could be either disturbing or soothing depending on their nature. She started experimenting with wind chimes made from scavenged materials, placing them where air currents would move them, creating ambient music that filled the space. She used fabric remnants found in dumpsters to create hanging installations that caught and softened light while dampening harsh echoes, making the space feel more intimate despite its size. "What are you trying to create?" Noah asked one evening as they worked together, hanging strips of colored plastic that would catch morning light. Clarice paused, considering the question. "I want to make a place where people can breathe, where they can remember that beauty exists, where they can feel peace even if just for a moment." "People like us?" Noah asked quietly. "Yes, people who've forgotten they matter, people the world has stopped seeing." As weeks became months, the observatory transformed. The changes were subtle at first, easy to miss if you didn't know to look. But gradually, the cold metal chamber became something else entirely, a space where light lived, where every moment of every day created different patterns of illumination, where the air itself seemed to glow with possibility. Clarice had found what she'd been looking for since that first terrible night in the rain. Not just shelter, but purpose. Not just survival, but creation. Not just existence, but art. The transformation consumed 6 months of relentless work. Every day brought new challenges, new solutions, new discoveries about what light could do when guided by intention. Clarice developed a routine. Mornings were for scavenging. She'd make the long walk down the hill before dawn, finding materials others had discarded. She learned which businesses threw out the best materials, which construction sites were careless with waste. Afternoons were for installation. She'd climb back up, arms full of salvaged treasures, spending hours figuring out how to integrate them into her growing creation. Each mirror had to be angled precisely, each prism positioned to catch specific wavelengths. Evenings were for observation. As sunlight faded and moonlight took over, the space transformed again. Clarice would sit with Noah and watch how their work affected the chamber, what adjustments needed to be made. "How do you know where to put everything?" Noah asked one night as they watched moonlight scatter through a newly installed arrangement of glass bottles. "I don't, always," Clarice admitted. "Sometimes I try something and it doesn't work. Sometimes it takes days to figure out the right position, but I can feel when it's right. Does that make sense?" "I think so. Like how I know when a drawing is finished." Exactly like that. Noah had become her partner in the work. The girl had her own artistic eye, often spotting compositions Clarice missed. She'd started creating her own installations in smaller rooms off the main chamber, working with materials too small or delicate for the primary space. They still struggled with basic survival. Food remained scarce. Winter brought brutal cold. Clarice developed a persistent cough. Noah's hands were always chapped from carrying water in freezing weather. But something had changed. The work gave them dignity, purpose, a reason beyond just surviving. One day, Clarice made a discovery that shifted everything. In a storage room, she found unopened boxes of equipment from the observatory's operating days, special mirrors, lenses ground to exceptional specifications, prisms of optical quality far beyond what she'd been scavenging. "Mom, this stuff looks expensive," Noah breathed. It was. "This is professional equipment, the real thing." Using this equipment, Clarice could create effects she'd only imagined. Light paths became more precise. Reflections achieved clarity that seemed magical. She created focal points, areas where light concentrated into pools of warmth. She created shadow spaces where absence of light became its own feature. She orchestrated interplay between brightness and darkness. The dome itself became her canvas. She used the panel's natural variations, enhanced them, turned the entire inner surface into a three-dimensional light painting that changed hour by hour. She incorporated found objects in unexpected ways. An old bicycle wheel became a circular frame for hanging crystals, creating a mandala of light. Broken colored glass formed abstract mosaics that came alive when illuminated. They lived on almost nothing. Clarice had become expert at finding food, day-old bakery donations, food banks, occasionally odd jobs. But money wasn't the point anymore. The work was the point. "Do you think we'll ever show this to anyone?" Noah asked one evening. Clarice had thought about this. What they were creating was extraordinary but also illegal. They were trespassers. Eventually, they'd be discovered. Maybe someday, when it's finished. "Is it almost finished?" Clarice looked around. Light moved through the chamber like breathing. Every surface contributed. Every object had been placed with intention. Almost. Just a few more pieces. Those final pieces took another month. Clarice became obsessed with perfection, fine-tuning light paths until they achieved exactly the effect she wanted. A space that felt sacred without being religious, peaceful without being empty, inspiring without being overwhelming. She added sound elements, finding old wind chimes and creating new ones. The dome's acoustics turned these into ambient music. The result was overwhelming. The observatory had become something beyond shelter, beyond art. It had become a sanctuary in the truest sense. On the evening Clarice considered it complete, she and Noah sat in the center, as sunset transformed into twilight. Light moved through their creation in waves. The space breathed around them. "We did this," Clarice said, voice catching. "You and I with nothing but trash and hope." Noah leaned against her mother. "What happens now?" It was the question Clarice had been avoiding. The world would find them. The world always did. The sirens came on a Thursday morning, 6 months and 3 weeks after they'd first entered the observatory. The sound started faint, then grew louder as vehicles climbed Crown Hill. Clarice was in the main chamber when she heard them. Her hands froze. Her heart stopped. "Mom!" Noah emerged from a side room, panic in her voice. "Is that—" "Police. They found us. They'd known this moment would come. Eventually, someone would need to inspect, would discover the break-in, would find them." "What do we do?" Noah asked, voice rising. Clarice forced herself to breathe, to think. They could run, try to escape, but where would they go? Back to park benches? No. If this was ending, it would end here, in the space they'd created. We stay. We let them come. They'll arrest us. Probably. Mum, Noah, listen. Whatever happens, remember something. We didn't do anything wrong. We survived. We created something beautiful. We took a dead place and made it live. That's not a crime. The sirens grew louder. Multiple vehicles. More than just police. This was an operation. They heard car doors slam, voices barking orders. Clarice and Noah stood in the center of the main chamber, holding hands, waiting. The pounding on the main doors was aggressive, authoritative. "This is the police, open up!" Clarice didn't move. She'd wedged those doors shut months ago. They'd have to break through. More pounding. Then the screech of metal being forced, locks breaking. The sound echoed through the dome, harsh and violent in a space Clarice had filled with gentle music and soft light. "We know you're in there. Come out now." Still, Clarice waited. If they were coming in, they would see. They would see what she'd built before they saw two homeless squatters. That mattered somehow. The main doors burst open. Morning light flooded in, harsh and unfiltered, nothing like the carefully modulated illumination Clarice had created. Silhouettes filled the doorway. Police officers, city officials, people with authority and purpose. "Hands where we can see them," a voice commanded. Clarice and Noah raised their hands. 3 police officers rushed in, guns drawn, treating them like criminals rather than 2 starving women who'd committed no violence, stolen nothing, harmed no one. "Clarice Winters?" one officer asked, referencing a clipboard. Someone had done research, found their names somehow. "Yes," Clarice said, keeping her voice steady. "You're trespassing on city property. You and your daughter need to come with us." Behind the officers, more people entered. Clarice recognized a city council member from news reports. Several people in suits who screamed lawyers. Someone with a camera, probably press, but none of them were looking at her and Noah. They were looking at the space. The morning light was hitting the observatory at precisely the right angle, filtered through the cracks and openings Clarice had carefully left, catching her installations at their most effective. The chamber was alive with light, every surface glowing, colors dancing, the air itself seeming to shimmer. The aggressive forward motion of the officials slowed, stopped. They stood in the doorway, weapons lowering, voices falling silent, as the space worked its effect on them. "What?" one of the lawyers started, then couldn't finish. "What is this place?" the council member whispered. Clarice didn't answer. She didn't need to. The space answered for itself. The police lowered their weapons, holstering them as they moved deeper into the chamber. Their training, their protocols seemed forgotten. Light poured through the space in layers. Morning sun filtered through strategic cracks, hitting mirrors that created cascades of illumination. Crystals and prisms suspended from the telescope fractured light into rainbows. Hanging installations moved gently, creating shifting patterns. The space felt sacred, like stepping into a cathedral built of light rather than stone. "How?" the city council member started, then stopped, overwhelmed. More people entered. The entire team that had come to execute an eviction found themselves instead standing in amazement at what Clarice had created. Some wandered the space in silence. Others whispered to each other, voices hushed as if speaking too loud might break the spell. A woman in an expensive suit approached Clarice. "You did this?" "Yes." Clarice's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "With what? How? With what people threw away? With what they didn't want anymore?" The woman looked around, trying to comprehend. "This must have cost nothing. Every piece here was scavenged, found, rescued from being trash. But the design, the planning—" "I was an art teacher," Clarice said. "Before." The 2 words carried weight. Before, meaning before homelessness, before desperation, before the world decided she and Noah didn't matter. The police officer who'd been in charge approached, his earlier aggression completely gone. "Ma'am, I still have orders. You're trespassing. I'm supposed to remove you from the premises." "I understand," Clarice said, "but—" He looked around helplessly. "I don't want to." This is beautiful," Noah said quietly. speaking for the first time since the officials arrived. "It's beautiful, because it's made from broken things. My mum taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless." The officer looked at Noah, really looked at her, and Clarice saw him register what he was seeing, a thin, exhausted 14-year-old girl who'd been living in an abandoned building because she had nowhere else to go. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "Almost 7 months," Clarice answered. 7 months. He shook his head. "And you built this." "We built this," Clarice corrected, putting her arm around Noah. "Both of us. Together." The city council member was on his phone, arguing with someone. "No, you need to see it. I can't describe it. Just get up here now." More people began arriving as word spread. First city employees, then media, then curious citizens. Each person entered skeptical and emerged transformed. A reporter tried to interview Clarice. "Can you explain what you've created here?" "It's a sanctuary, a place where light reminds us that beauty exists even in abandoned places, even in forgotten people." "But you were trespassing." "I was surviving. We were dying out there, invisible to everyone. This building was dying too, so we saved each other." By noon, the observatory was filled with people. The mayor arrived, clearly prepared to deal with a squatter situation, and instead finding himself in the middle of something he couldn't understand. Art critics came. The story was spreading. Homeless woman creates masterpiece in abandoned building. Throughout it all, Clarice and Noah stood together in the center of the main chamber, surrounded by what they'd created, waiting for the world to decide their fate. "What do you want to happen now?" one of the officials finally asked Clarice. She looked around at the space, at the light moving through it, at the faces of people experiencing something they hadn't expected to feel. She looked at Noah, who was watching her with trust despite everything. "I want this place to matter," Clarice said. "I want it to be what it's become, a sanctuary for people who need to remember that they're more than their worst circumstances. I want it to prove that abandoned things, abandoned people, can still create beauty." "That's not a small request," the mayor said. "No," Clarice agreed, "but nothing about the last 7 months has been small." The debate that followed lasted hours. Legal issues, liability concerns, questions of precedent. But underlying every argument was an undeniable truth. What Clarice had created here was extraordinary, and destroying it would be a tragedy. As sunset approached and light transformed the space once again, the mayor made his announcement. "The city will not press charges," he said. "Instead, we're establishing the Silver Crown as a municipal art installation and community space. Ms. Winters, if you're willing, we'd like to offer you the position of curator." Clarice heard the words but couldn't quite process them. Curator, position, as if she had rights, authority, value. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked. "It means this place is yours, to maintain, to develop, to share with others. It means you and your daughter have housing. It means you're not homeless anymore." The words hit Clarice like a physical force. Not homeless, not invisible, not forgotten. Noah grabbed her mother's hand, squeezing so hard it hurt. "Yes," Clarice said, her voice breaking. "Yes, we're willing." 3 months later, the Silver Crown Observatory officially opened to the public as what media had dubbed the Light Sanctuary. Clarice stood at the entrance, wearing clean clothes provided by donations, her hair cut and styled for the first time in a year, watching people line up to experience what she'd created. The line stretched down Crown Hill, hundreds of people waiting patiently for their turn to enter the space she'd transformed from abandoned ruin into living art. "You nervous?" Noah asked. Her daughter had gained weight, color returning to her cheeks, light returning to her eyes. She was enrolled in school again, making friends, drawing constantly, creating her own art inspired by what they'd built together. "Terrified," Clarice admitted, watching the crowd. "What if they don't understand it? What if they see it differently than I intended?" "They will. Everyone who's seen it understands. You can't not understand it, Mom. It speaks for itself." The city had done minimal work on the building, made it structurally sound, added proper utilities, installed required safety features. But they'd been extremely careful not to touch Clarice's installations. The light paths, the mirrors, the hanging elements, the carefully orchestrated interplay of reflection and refraction all remained exactly as she'd created them, preserved as the artwork they'd become. What had changed was Clarice herself. The curator position came with a small apartment in the observatory's renovated administrative wing. Nothing fancy, but it had heat, running water, a real kitchen. More importantly, it had security. No one could take it from them. They had a home, official and permanent. The job included a salary, not much, but steady and reliable, enough to buy food without rationing every bite, enough to replace Noah's worn-out clothes, enough to breathe without constant panic about survival, without wondering where they'd sleep tomorrow. But beyond material security, the position gave Clarice something she'd lost during those desperate months: dignity, purpose, recognition that she had value, that her art mattered, that her life meant something beyond mere survival. The doors opened. Visitors began entering in small groups, guided by volunteers who'd been trained to let people experience the space without excessive explanation. Clarice watched their faces as they entered the main chamber, saw the same transformation she'd witnessed that first day when officials had burst in with eviction orders, prepared to remove squatters, and instead finding themselves standing in wonder. Over the following weeks, the Light Sanctuary became unexpectedly popular. People came from across the state to experience it. Art critics wrote essays analyzing her use of found materials and natural light. Spiritual leaders of various faiths held services in the space, finding common ground in its universal sense of peace that transcended specific doctrine. But Clarice's favorite visitors were the ones who came alone, quietly, clearly carrying burdens: the exhausted parents, the grief-stricken, the lost and searching. They'd sit in the space for hours, letting light wash over them, finding whatever healing they needed in the gentle radiance and peaceful atmosphere. One afternoon, a woman approached Clarice after spending 2 hours sitting silently in the main chamber. She was middle-aged, well-dressed, but her eyes carried deep sadness that expensive clothes couldn't hide. "Thank you," the woman said simply, her voice thick with emotion. "For what?" Clarice asked gently. "For reminding me that beauty still exists. I lost my son 6 months ago. I couldn't remember how to feel anything except grief. But here, for just a little while, I felt peace. I felt like maybe I could survive this." Clarice hugged her, this stranger whose pain she understood in her own way. That's why it exists. That's why it had to exist. For people who need to remember that light survives darkness. Word spread further. The sanctuary attracted attention from arts organizations, grants from foundations interested in community healing spaces. Clarice was offered significant money to recreate her work elsewhere, to franchise the concept, to make it commercial. She refused every offer. "This place is specific," she told frustrated gallery owners and disappointed developers. "It exists because I was desperate, because I had nothing but need and vision. I can't recreate that artificially. This sanctuary was born from genuine necessity that can't be manufactured." Instead, she focused on deepening what she'd begun. She added new installations as seasons changed, adapting the space to work with different qualities of light throughout the year: the sharp clarity of winter sun, the soft abundance of summer light, the golden warmth of autumn, the fresh brightness of spring. She started teaching workshops, showing people how to see beauty in discarded materials, how to transform nothing into something meaningful, how to take what the world had thrown away and make it sacred. Noah began giving her own tours, explaining to visitors her perspective on watching her mother create the space while they both struggled to survive. Her honesty, her youth, her insight touched people in ways different from but complementary to Clarice's artistic vision. On the anniversary of that first desperate night, when they'd climbed Crown Hill in a storm with nowhere else to go, the city held a ceremony. They unveiled a plaque at the observatory's entrance, words Clarice had helped compose: "The Light Sanctuary, created by Clarice Winters." from abandoned materials in an abandoned place, proof that nothing and no one is ever truly without value. May all who enter remember their own light. Clarice read the plaque 3 times, crying, not just for herself and Noah, but for everyone who'd ever felt discarded, forgotten, worthless. This was for them too. This was proof that transformation was possible. That evening, after the crowds left and the ceremony ended, Clarice and Noah sat alone in the main chamber as they'd done so many nights before. But now it was different. They weren't hiding. They weren't afraid. They weren't wondering where they'd sleep tomorrow. They were home. "Do you ever miss the way it was before?" Noah asked thoughtfully. "When it was just ours, when it was a secret, when nobody knew?" Clarice thought about this carefully. There had been something special about working in isolation, creating for no audience but themselves, building beauty in secret. But there was something better about sharing it, about watching light heal others as it had healed them. "No," she said finally. "It needed to be shared. Light doesn't work if it's kept in darkness. Light exists to be seen, to illuminate, to remind people of possibilities they'd forgotten." As sunset transformed into night, the sanctuary's automated systems activated. Motion sensors and timers Clarice had reluctantly agreed to install for safety and security. But she'd programmed them carefully to maintain the space's essential nature. Even mechanized, the light moved as it always had, gentle and alive and responding to natural rhythms. "What do you want to do next?" Noah asked, looking at her mother with trust and curiosity. Clarice smiled. For the first time in over a year, she had the luxury of thinking about future beyond tomorrow, beyond next week, beyond immediate survival. She had time. She had resources. She had possibilities she'd never dared imagine during those desperate months. "I want to make sure this place lives forever," she said. "I want to train others to maintain it, to understand it, to help it grow and evolve. I want every person who ever felt worthless to know that they can create beauty, that they matter, that light exists even in the darkest places, waiting to be found and shared." "That's a big goal, Mom." "We've already done impossible things," Clarice said, pulling her daughter close. "What's one more?" They sat in comfortable silence as night deepened and moonlight took over from sun, as it did every evening in the eternal dance of light. The sanctuary shifted with the changing illumination, as it always did, as it always would. A living space breathing with possibility, built from nothing by someone everyone had given up on, proving that abandoned things could become sacred. Clarice thought about the journey that had brought them here, the injustices, the suffering, the desperate climb up Crown Hill in the rain. She thought about breaking into an abandoned building with no plan except survival. She thought about that first morning when she'd seen light dance across forgotten mirrors and felt a spark of her former self awakening. Most of all, she thought about Noah, who'd endured everything with trust and resilience, who'd helped create beauty when they had nothing but need and hope, who'd never stopped believing in her mother, even when Clarice had almost stopped believing in herself. "I love you, baby," Clarice said, her voice full of emotion. "I love you too, Mom. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for showing me that we could make something beautiful, even when everything was broken. Thank you for giving me a reason not to give up. Thank you for being strong when I needed you to be." Outside, the city continued its busy life, most people unaware of the miracle at the top of Crown Hill, but those who needed it found their way there, drawn by word of mouth by the universal human hunger for light. And in the center of it all, in the heart of a space that had been dead and was now alive, Clarice and Noah sat together, no longer invisible, no longer forgotten, no longer homeless. They were guardians now, keepers of light and of love, proof that abandoned things with vision could yet become sacred. The light sanctuary breathed around them, a living masterpiece built from trash and desperation and hope. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Thousands in our Dreams Don't Age community find hope in these stories of resilience and second chances. Subscribe and join a family that believes it's never too late for miracles. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their own light today.